What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 137, and I'm the co host, Kyle Anzalone, joined by the other co host, Will Porter. Will, how's it going today?
I'm doing great. Kyle, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right, Will, but I gotta say, the media is just spinning some pretty ridiculous propaganda. Stories claiming massive protests in Cuba. You do a quick reverse image search on Google, and you find that, oh man, this was a pro Castro rally from 2013. Not
Right.
exactly the anti government freedom protests that they claim them to be. So, we're going to be debunking a lot of propaganda today, including about our favorite Russiagate conspiracy theorist, Luke Carding, who spun another completely ridiculous story. So, tons of great stuff on today's show, everyone. Be sure to share it. Find the show at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for the full archive of the show. You also get my daily news roundup there. Subscribe to the show on any of your favorite podcast platforms. You find the video version at YouTube or Odysee. It's really helpful when you like or share the show from there. You can find the show on any of our social media accounts, Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter. The Twitter handle is at con_interest. And one of the biggest things you do to support the show is to, donate and set up a recurring donation either at Patreon or Subscribestar. Very easy, just, Patreon, Subscribestar, conflicts of interest. It'll come right up on Google for you. All right, and then the other thing you could do, and this one comes with some great perks for yourself because you're going to get some great CBD products. And, when CBD especially will, when you're able to take high quality products that are consistent, it's not taking a head shop gummy anymore. We're talking about something the equivalent of taking a vitamin. If it was, I think, a little bit more acceptable, you see it right in the vitamin aisle next to, your Men's Health vitamin thing at CVS or Walgreens or wherever you do your pharmacy shopping. But we get ours from Paloma Verde, and right on their website they had their high quality lab tested results, so that, like, hey, this isn't just like some random thing that some guy is saying there's this much of it in. And when you start taking CBD on a consistent basis, you start to realize, oh, there's a lot of benefits here. And well, I know you've had some luck with some of their soft gels, so why don't you tell us about your experience?
Yeah, they have a few different kinds of the soft gels that I like. They have the curcumin formulation. I think that helps for like inflammation and stuff. But my personal favorite is the melatonin soft gels that help me, relax at night. I have some problems with insomnia, so that helps me get to bed. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, definitely visit palomaverdecbd.com and use the promo code PEACE to get 25% off your order of $75 or more.
All right, well, let's get into the news here. And as I said before, we start off with one of our favorite Russiagate conspiracy theorists, Luke Carding. And why I say he's one of our favorites, Will, of all the tall tales spun during the whole Russiagate conspiracy, his have proven to be the pinnacle of stupidity and easy to debunk, and it really makes the whole Russiagator like movement look dumb and stupid when they're pulling out things that are so absurd. And here we're seeing more of that. But anyways, this is catching back on, and I think it's just important, well, to put out the fires before they start to spread. He's got a new one out, Luke Harding in the Guardian. Kremlin papers appear to show Putin's plot to put Trump in White House. So, Will, I guess the first problem with this entire story is that it completely ignores Trump's foreign policy, right? That if we're honestly assessing that Vladimir Putin had information on Donald Trump. Well, you've had the test run. You had Donald Trump's presidency. He was president for 4 years and didn't do anything that was kinder to Russia than any other American presidents. In fact, he's been far more ridiculous and sanctions and aggressive policies on Ukraine and Syria, and sanctioning Russia for allegations of chemical weapons use when there was no evidence for it. And Harding ignores all of this and just says that, hey, I came into possession of some documents that he admits have been in the possession of Western intelligence for some months, and yet we didn't hear about it. And he says that independent experts say they appear to be genuine. Now, this is as written. The Guardian has shown the documents to independent experts who say they appear to be genuine. Now, Will, Does he say who the independent experts are? I mean, that might be important, right? If the independent expert is Ray McGovern, then I think there's some credibility to this. He was the head of the Russia desk at the CIA, and there's some other people I put in that category too. But if we're talking about like John Brennan or some FBI hack, or as an independent source could literally be pretty much anyone. An expert is a very vague term. It could be former Russian defectors or something like this, or Soviet defectors. Like, who knows, right? But they say, they appear to be genuine. And then they say that on January 22nd of 2016, so this is 10 months before the election, maybe a little bit less, Putin held a meeting where he personally said that we want the Russian intelligence agency to try to help Donald Trump win the election. And again, this is just something that Luke Harding says was said at a meeting with Vladimir Putin. There's two really great articles on this, Will, that I found the past week. One is titled Russiagate, Luke Harding's Hard Sell. This is by Joe Loria. And then the other one is Ray McGovern's article on this, The Guardian regurgitating the Russiagate canard. And a lot of the things that they bring up are, kind of the same points. I think Gloria spans on it a little bit more than McGovern. McGovern's, by the way, was at antiwar.com, and we've actually run 5 articles by McGovern, I think, in the past week. So if anybody wants some just really great editorials, you could find them at McGovern's section at antiwar.com.
Yeah.
But what they break down, again, as I kind of pointed out, that there's really not a reason to believe that these documents are authentic just because unnamed people that Luke Harding showed them to say they're true. And McGovern goes into like some of the reasons why this probably wouldn't have happened. But they both also bring up the biggest issue, which is just Vladimir Putin got Donald Trump elected for what? He had to get out of the INF treaty, to destroy the Open Skies Treaty, to talk about to actually expand NATO, and to talk about including Ukraine in NATO, to give arms to Ukraine that Obama refused to do, to put heavier sanctions on Russia. So doesn't that have to at least be a question that comes up when this paper allegedly comes out? Even if Harding had to acknowledge like, oh, this whole thing blew up in Putin's face or something, but he doesn't even do that. So, Will, do you have anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, I admittedly have not gone through the Harding article carefully and looked at every allegation in there. But if you even just look at the headline, like you see all this very weaselly kind of language. Kremlin papers appear to show. And if you were actually going to accurately headline that, it'd be like apparent Kremlin papers appear to show. So it's like apparentlys on top of apparentlys. All this weaselly language that suggests they're not really too certain about this reporting either. The Guardian's, I'm sure Harding's editors went in there and added all this qualifying language. Now I've seen a couple other things too. Like Caitlin Johnstone, I know had a good thread on this whole thing with this Harding piece, and I know she was citing somebody who was questioning like the authenticity of the alleged Russian documents, pointing to some like linguistic issues with them. And I don't know enough about Russian language linguistics to be able to look at that myself. But there are some independent experts out there who are disputing and quibbling that this actually is a genuine Russian language document, that it was actually written by native Russian speakers. And then another thing to look at here is, you mentioned Luke Harding kind of has this long track record of crazy Russiagate reporting. Like he has a long track record as well of using dodgy and flimsy sourcing. I mean, he did an entire book, I think, called Collusion, all about alleged, Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. And when Aaron Mate, a great journalist, interviewed him, I think, for The Real News, you'll see Harding has a very hard time even just giving basic substantiation for a subject he wrote an entire book about. And he ends up hanging up on Aaron Mate in that interview because Aaron just keeps pressing him for some kind of proof or backing. And then also people might remember Harding was behind the story that Paul Manafort allegedly met with Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And for that, he had very flimsy sourcing. And it turns out Manafort's own passports don't back that up, doesn't show that he visited London at those times. So this is who we're talking about here. Someone with a long track record of doctoring sources or using very flimsy or questionable sources. But that seems to be this guy's MO.
Right. So there's a difference, Will, between people who are suckers and get burned by sources, even if they get burned by sources regularly and keep going back to them. That
Right.
seems to be one thing. But then there's lazy journalism that's easy to look into, and Harding can't even do that. So with the passport, very easy to ask for a copy of his passport and then at least mention that his passport shows he wasn't there. Also,
Right.
this is one of the most heavily surveilled buildings in the entire world. It was Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy. There would be some kind of proof that you would expect to turn up in this case. I'm not saying that in every case you had to expect hard proof, but in this one it seems like you really would have to acknowledge that, like, hey, we looked at all these sources and we couldn't find any hard proof, and he doesn't do that in the article. And so he's just a lazy journalist who will pick up on any rumor to expand on any claim that he believes is true, even if it's not. And it's just a shame that outlets and prominent outlets with huge readerships like The Guardian continue to promote this guy. Will, should we move on and talk about Haiti?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so bad news here. That we talked about the presidential assassination. In fact, on the last show with Patrick McFarlane, we really went through some of the long-standing U.S. intervention from over a century ago when the U.S. invaded and stayed for 2 decades to what
Yeah.
the Clintons did there after the earthquake, and spreading cholera and just completely wrecking the country, taking dollars in charity money that was supposed to go there and producing absolutely nothing, helping the people of Haiti to continue to live in poverty. How the U.S. has propped up the past couple of leaders, including at one time, the former leader who was just assassinated, seemed to be backed by the United States. We were saying, hey, we supported his claim to the presidency, even though it didn't seem to be true, or within the Haitian Constitution. Although I've had comments on the show of people who deny this, and I gotta say, from what the reading I did about the Constitution in Haiti, it seems flat. People are making fair interpretations of it. It doesn't seem like anybody's making a completely absurdly stupid interpretation. But anyways,
Yeah.
the U.S. was backing his claims to power, which is the important part of our story. And now, Will, we are looking at the U.S. sending some Marines to Haiti. So what are they going to be doing there, and how big of a deal is this?
Yeah, so the last time I was on, we did discuss the possibility of a U.S. troop deployment to Haiti. There's all kinds of instability right now. The president was just killed. There's some fears of, further unrest or additional attacks on officials or whatever. The interim government over there had requested a U.S. troop deployment soon after Moise was killed. And the White House, like as I mentioned last time, right away had signaled that like we won't be doing that. It seemed like they had sort of said, that's not happening. However, they did kind of leave some loophole there. They did say that there was no plans to send troops at this time, which kind of always, that's a nice little qualifier, a little loophole they can always leave for themselves. Because on Thursday, Biden did confirm that we will, in fact, be sending some Marines after all. But he insisted this will only be to go work security at the U.S. Embassy in the capital of Haiti, Port-au-Prince. He's saying that no larger deployment is on the table right now. But even then, he still kind of said at this moment that a larger deployment is not on the table at this moment. So I guess it could depend on what happens there. If the situation really continues to deteriorate, maybe something else could happen. Right now, it doesn't seem like they do have any intention to send a larger deployment beyond the Marines at the embassy. But it's always hard to say, because they had already said before that we won't be sending any troops, and here we now have a small contingent of Marines. So, they seem to like to leave themselves some wiggle room in this kind of stuff. So it's hard to say hard to foreclose the possibility of another deployment. They have already sent federal agents from the FBI and the DHS and a few other agencies to help with the investigation, the Haitian investigation. And actually, Reuters reported last week, too, on Tuesday, that a small number of personnel had been sent to guard the embassy. And it's not totally clear what that was about. I'm not sure if that was like early reporting on the Marine deployment, and that's what they were talking about, because the report doesn't say what personnel had been sent. It just said like around a dozen people had been sent to guard the embassy. So I'm not totally sure what the deal is with that, whether that was a separate deployment, because they had also suggested, too, that some of them had left already. They had just been there in sort of the immediate aftermath of the assassination. But either way, though, there seems to be more and more American involvement in Haiti right now, up to and including this small military deployment to the embassy. And we also have the federal agents from 4 or 5 different agencies and possibly another separate security detail that was mentioned in that Reuters report. So that's about all I have on the Marine deployment. I'll let you jump in real quick before there was another development in Haiti, too, that was interesting. But if you have anything to say, I'll let you say it.
Yeah, so I guess, well, you're saying this is a small deployment, and it is common for Marines to defend embassies, especially in places where there could possibly be some unrest or something like this. This is typically the role of a Marines, and I guess it doesn't seem all that unusual. I just want to put that in context, right? Or is
Yeah.
this something uncommon?
No, no, that's absolutely correct. It's not super uncommon when there's like, instability or violence or unrest in a foreign country with the U.S. embassy. We will sometimes send Marines to go guard it. So that's not unheard of for sure.
Now, that being said, Will, we do know that the U.S., the Pentagon, was involved in training some of the assassins, and we do
Right.
know that the U.S. carries out covert actions out of our embassies. And so, if somebody in Haiti, and I think me and you should remain skeptical and on guard that this could be deeper than just sending a few Marines to an embassy to guard in case like riots break out to make sure we don't have another Chris Stevens, the tragedy that happened in Libya, which it is a real tragedy and something that's
Yeah.
really a shame that it happened. We don't want our embassies raided and our ambassadors killed. And so, yeah, again, in some sense, this made sense, but in another, it is something to be kind of aware of and to pay attention to, especially if, maybe it starts with 12 and then, we're up to 50 in a couple months or something like that. Although I'm not sure how big our embassy is in Haiti, if this is closer to, Afghanistan or Iraq where it's a massive compound, or if
Right.
it's, just like an embassy in the U.S. where it's a building in downtown Port-au-Prince.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would definitely, urge people to be on guard. Like, I wouldn't say just because Biden says there's no plans right now to send a broader force, because the Haitian government has been asking for a full-on deployment to like stabilize the country and make sure nothing, a coup or something doesn't happen. And so Biden is sort of signaling right now that that won't be happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it won't, just because they say that.
Right. Well, why don't you get into your other news on Haiti?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, there was another development last week specifically related to the current interim leader, this guy Claude Joseph. And last time that I was on, we did talk about how there is this group of lawmakers who have declared two other guys to be president and prime minister. Because right now, Claude Joseph, I think, is filling both roles in sort of an interim capacity. But these lawmakers have come out in Haiti and said that this other guy that Moise had like appointed just before his death, this guy Ariel Henry, that he should be legit, he should be the guy in charge. So there is like sort of a challenge within Haiti to Claude Joseph's authority. However, both the U.S. State Department and the United Nations had previously gotten behind Claude Joseph. They had said that he should be the guy in charge. He should rule until there's another election, and sort of, he should be the interim guy. Well, as of Saturday, that appears to have changed now because this like big important grouping of international diplomats called the Core Group put out this statement on Saturday saying that Ariel Henry, the guy who had Moise had selected to be a successor, that Ariel Henry should be the one to form a new government, and that actually he should be the legitimate sort of figurehead guy in charge. They didn't even mention Claude Joseph in their statement at all. Actually, they just say that Ariel Henry should fulfill his mandate and form a new government. And this core group is, a powerful organization. It's made up of diplomats from the U.S. and Germany and Brazil and Canada and Spain and France and the EU, as well as like representatives from the UN and the OAS, actually, the Organization of American States, which is sort of made up of a bunch of Latin American countries and is very sort of favorable to Washington's position. They're headquartered in Washington. So a very powerful list of countries and organizations that are behind the statement. And I'm not really sure what to make of it. Like even a lot of the reporting I think was like reporters were confused about this. The headlines were like U.S. appears to snub current Haitian leader, because it seems like all the statement could do is make more chaos and confusion and instability, especially after they already came out and endorsed the other guy. So now there's like conflicting claims to authority within Haiti, and there's conflicting support from the international community. So it's all kind of a huge mess. And I'm wondering too if this is going to foreshadow some kind of further unrest that might actually, spur some kind of larger U.S. deployment, because it seems like that could head in that direction.
Right. And there hasn't been like a real clarification from the Biden administration on what their position is here, because
Yeah.
we know during the Trump years there are conflicting things coming out. So who knows? Maybe you have some Victoria Nuland esque figure somewhere in the State Department meddling around and putting out a statement that doesn't reflect the rest of the Biden administration, or didn't maybe have approval, or kind of slipped through the cracks as a lot of other things were going on. But
Right.
that does seem concerning to me, that we're starting to flip flop around and pit different sides, not necessarily because I think the US should be backing one side or the other, but when it does this and it is the world superpower for a small island nation, half island of the, is Haiti,
Sure.
it really can, I think, impact of what's going on the island and create a lot more instability. But as far as as long as they're talking about instability in Caribbean islands, well, should we move over to Cuba?
Yes, yeah. Let's get to that story.
Okay, well, so if you go through your Facebook feed, especially if you have a lot of pro-Trump people or just Republicans in general in your feed, you will see video after video saying massive protests in Cuba. The Cuban people are rising up and taking back their freedom. And then if you do this thing where you click on the photo, right click, you could just as an option on Chrome for me, you could pick reverse image search, and you could go and you could find where these images and videos, and some of them are authentic, I'm not saying that, but there is a lot of wrong stuff out there, Will, so fill us in on this.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have a ton on this one, but I do think it's worth just pointing out just to see how these false claims can spread through corporate media very fast and false reporting. So the Associated Press had this photo of a pro-government demonstration in Cuba on July 11th. After the big anti-government protests had kicked off, people kind of came out to counter-protest and to show their support for the Cuban, socialist regime over there. Well, the AP had captioned this photo as an anti-government protest, exactly the opposite of the truth. And this caption gets picked up like by countless other outlets. You had the Guardian, the Financial Times, Fox, the NYT, the Washington Times, even the U.S.'s own state-backed outlet, Voice of America, had it. And they actually had two different versions of the wrong caption. So like their people had looked at this, edited it slightly, but they left the wrong part still intact. So there was this spread like wildfire through all these different outlets. The AP and the Guardian did eventually correct it, but the last I had checked, the original false caption was still up at a bunch of different outlets. That this still wasn't fixed. And you might say that you kind of can't blame them. Like the AP is typically you'd think they're trustworthy, one of the trustworthy news wires. And you might ask, how could anyone know whether this group of people is pro or anti-government if they're just kind of standing there? If you just see a group of people, it doesn't necessarily cry out that they're pro or anti-government. But that doesn't really work in this case because in these photos you can see these gigantic banners reading 26 Yulio in the photo, and that means the 26th of July movement, which is Fidel Castro's thing. It's clearly a bunch of supporters of the government carrying these very distinctive, iconic banners, pro-government slogans. And you really only need to know a little bit about Cuban politics to notice that, to know that these are pro-Castro people based on the banners they're carrying. And I think it's kind of telling that so few people caught this and that it took so long for these corrections to come out. Like a lot of these reporters just aren't aware of these basic facts of Cuban politics. Now, I'll admit, I don't know if I would have noticed that on my own, but I have not been doing this nearly as long as some of these professionals at the AP and the Guardian or whatever. And the AP photo also was not the only one. CNN had also captioned another picture falsely, where they said it showed a protest in Cuba when actually it was a protest in Miami. And in CNN's case, it seemed more deliberately dishonest because they used the original caption that was created by AFP, the French news agency, but they cut off the first part that made it clear that the protest was in the US. They just used sort of like the background section of the caption that said like Cubans have been protesting in their own country. But they used that to make it seem as if this protest was in Cuba, not in Miami. So there's all kinds of stuff that's been floating around. Like, obviously, it's worse when news outlets do it, but if you just go on Twitter, you can see people sharing pictures of like protests in Egypt and Spain and Argentina. Some of them aren't even protests. It's like people celebrating after a football match in Argentina, claiming these are the Cuban protests. So there's all kinds of stuff that has been going around that really adds to the confusion here and makes it kind of hard to know what is real and what isn't on social media, especially.
Yeah, one of my favorites is where you could clearly see the Palestinian flag, right? It should be just very obvious. So if you're going to share photos of, protests and stuff like this, just take a minute to do like, and to look at the picture and make sure it made sense. If it's in Cuba, there should be Cuban flags. There shouldn't be, I mean, maybe, there's a bunch of Cuban flags and a Palestinian flag. It's possible to show solidarity, that doesn't necessarily completely discredit. But if it's all Palestinian flags and you don't see a Cuban flag anywhere, That should be a
Right.
problem. Also, not that everybody speaks a bunch of languages, but try, if it's a video, actually click on it and see if it sounds like Spanish or Arabic. They're pretty distinctive.
Yeah.
Like most of us have taken enough Spanish to like pick out a couple Spanish words, and you're not gonna pick out a couple Arabic words and mistake them for being Spanish or something like that. So take some time and do a little bit of research, especially when it's something like this where there's so much U.S. deep state involvement in pushing these kind of things. If Marco Rubio is pushing it, you should be skeptical of it.
Yeah.
It's a good rule of thumb. I guess the other thing I'll mention when it comes to Cuba, especially, I find a lot of libertarians just kind of blindly go in on, well, the government's bad and the people must be crying out for freedom because it's communism. And while I'm somewhat tempted to, share that sentiment, when I look at a lot of these protests, they don't look as big as people are claiming. It looks like a few people walking around. And I can't help but notice, well, because, I pay attention to international news. I've seen far bigger protests in the past couple of years in nearly every other like Latin American country. Chile, Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia had massive, massive protests where people really did fill the streets and were shoulder to shoulder. And it
Yeah.
just seems curious to me that some people are out there protesting and the streets again not even pat. There are people out there, they are crying for freedom, but it seems dozens or hundreds, definitely not thousands at times. And I'm always skeptical on buying into how big the numbers the mainstream media puts forward are.
Yeah, absolutely. It did seem like there was sort of like a real push, a unified push to kind of embellish like how large these protests were, and that was helped along by these like false images, falsely captioned images, and some that are just old and completely unrelated, not even in Cuba. Like the one from Buenos Aires, you can see like the big obelisk in the city, like that's not in Cuba, clearly.
Right. And then the other thing I was just going to mention is, the other thing, it seems like when some protests happen around the world, doesn't go trending on Twitter. This thing what has been trending on Twitter for days and days. And again, it seems like mostly American accounts that are tweeting these, or English accounts that are tweeting these, the, SOS Cuba out, Cuba Libertante or whatever they have. It's English speaking account, so I'm not quite sure how big of a deal this actually is in Cuba. I'm very skeptical of that. Is a lot of my point to all of this, but the U.S. mainstream media has been making all they can out of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right,
Did
well,
you want to get over to our next story?
yeah,
All right, great. Yeah, I know we had some, we had a couple things actually related to, just like this growing trend. I mean, this is kind of par for the course. It's been happening for quite a while now, but sort of a growing trend that, the mergers of state power and social media and how those things are kind of coming together to control speech and thought in society. And so I know I think Twitter had put out this report recently about some of those pressures that it's facing from governments around the world. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is from Reuters. Exclusive. Twitter sees jumping government demands to remove content of reporters and news outlets. This is a report from the second half of 2020, and it is a world report, so this isn't just the United States. But it said that the verified accounts of 199 journalists and news outlets on its platform face 136 legal demands from governments to remove content in the second half of 2020, up 26% from the first half of this year. I believe India was one of the leading countries, as well as Turkey, Pakistan, and Russia. So again, it's not like every single one of these is being directed at the U.S., but these are governments all putting pressure on Twitter to bend to their security standards. Now, I think that the American pressure is probably the most important, well, because these are American companies, and Congress can take different actions to that would reduce the profits of these social media companies. They even talked about naming them monopolies and pursuing them with antitrust legislation. And so I think that Facebook and Twitter have a real interest in appeasing the U.S. Congress. But some other numbers that came out. are that it received 14,500 requests from information, and it produced some or all that information in 30% of cases. So these are, I guess, in some way, the government says that, hey, we got a request from the government to know who's behind this account. And in 30% of the cases, they give out some information. I don't know if that's like IP addresses, names, or whatever, or why these things are being made, but it is disturbing, and everybody should know that if you're putting things on Facebook or Twitter, the government can, make demands for that information. It's also interesting, they don't say, if Twitter would give, let's say, Will, you're going on about Palestine, and you're really exposing some Israel war crimes in Gaza. Can the Israeli government solicit information from Twitter to, about you? None that is clear exactly,
Yeah.
but they do give information to governments when they make requests. And then the last thing it notes is there were 38,500 legal demands, and I guess these would come from private people to take
Right.
down various content, and it complied with 29% of the demands. My guess is that a lot of these are probably like copyright or something like that, or maybe like potentially sex trafficking esque
Right.
photographs, stuff like that. Somebody has a video, they demand Twitter takes it down. Anyways, well, I thought those numbers were really interesting. I don't know if you have anything. I don't have a lot of other analysis, but to know that governments are soliciting Twitter takedown posts and information of accounts users, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One thing I would note, the Reuters report had noted that India was at sort of the top of the list this time. For 2020, they saw this big increase, and India is leading that charge, which kind of makes sense because India just introduced this social media regulation that really tries to put the companies under the purview and under the authority of the state much more, where they want to be able to compel these companies into complying, providing information, or scrubbing certain posts, things like that. However, the Reuters report does note that the United States usually is at the top of the list, so this is sort of like an outlier this last year.
Right. Well, now I want to get into something I think you have some very detailed information on, but I'll just go over the broad strokes here. I think one of Jen Psaki's most probably shared press conferences now, she made a really interesting statement about there being about a dozen social media accounts that are allowed on Facebook but taken off of other platforms. And she says they account for producing 65% of the vaccine misinformation out there. And so, kind of will with what's been going on. Again, Jen Psaki saying that these 12 accounts are behind 65% of the misinformation. I'm just kind of curious, Will, on if you have any idea of who's behind those accounts. And again, as I said before, with all the legal like pressures that these social media companies can put out there, or that the government can put on the social media companies. I'm very concerned that Facebook, or that the White House would be able to basically get Facebook to censor whoever they want.
Yeah, this is really creepy. This announcement that we had, or this comment from Jen Psaki about how they're trying to pressure Facebook to suppress what they call COVID misinformation and literally flagging what she called problematic posts for them to delete. So this is effectively the government telling a platform, social media platform, what speech is and is not allowed. That's effectively what they're saying here. And even if it's not sort of a binding order, I think we can kind of see the pressure that they can put on these companies to comply. But yeah, you mentioned that Psaki kind of brought up. She said there are 12 accounts that are behind like all this, vaccine disinformation, and this all kind of came up in the context of a report released by the Surgeon General's office last week about confronting health misinformation. And it called for a bunch of different things, but specifically talks about like tweaking the algorithms on these platforms to blot out posts that they don't like, and to protect journalists from harassment and a lot of these kind of things. However, I'm not totally sure about like the 12 accounts that she's talking about themselves and what they are and who's behind them. However, I do know where that number comes from, that 12 account number, because this is mentioned in the Surgeon General's report. But if you look at their footnote, they're citing this group called the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which is this very establishment pro-censorship group based both in the U.S. and the U.K. They actually put a report out in March called the Disinformation Dozen, which is about specifically these 12 accounts that are supposedly spreading all this anti-vaxxer stuff. I guess there are just like a few like information networks that they say are sharing a lot of this. And they've been calling to have these things deleted. And so that is where Psaki is getting this number. Um, and this org that it's coming from, they're pretty opaque about like who backs them and who funds them. They claim that it comes from a bunch of philanthropic grants, but they don't say from where or from who or how they get them. However, it is very clear that they have very close ties to the UK Labour Party. Their founder, Imran Ahmed, and a bunch of their board members have directly worked for the Labour Party in the past. So kind of this like center-left establishment kind of group. They've been one of the main orgs pushing for all this social media censorship stuff, not only for COVID and for vaccine disinfo, but for anything they consider remotely like right-wing or conservative or nationalist. You can tell by their name, they're called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And so they consider all that stuff to be hate speech. In fact, this group has even led a campaign against the Federalist, the news outlet, which is not exactly the most like hardline right-wing outlet. They're pretty tame conservative media, but they tried to get Google to boot them off their ad service because the Federalist ran an op-ed about the George Floyd riots that they didn't like. And so that's who our government is relying on here. This organization that's one of the most censorious establishment orgs out there, behind all this social media censorship stuff. And so that is where they're taking their information and their talking points from to sort of lead this push to suppress information on Facebook.
Right. And it seems possible to me, Will, that a philanthropic org, because you said that's, listed as the funders of that organization, could be something like, I'm not saying that the Gates Foundation's funding, but something like the Gates Foundation, where we know that Gates has a vested interest in vaccines and that he makes money off of this. And so without disclosing who the backers of this group are and where they get their funding, then I think we should have real questions about their motives. And as you point out, very disturbing that the White House seems to be just willing to essentially take that list at their word and are now targeting taking those accounts off of Facebook. And Will, I mean, I don't know the polling on this, but as far as it goes, it seems like this kind of censorship makes a whole lot of people more skeptical of the vaccine than anything like RFK Jr. is going to put out there, to be quite honest. Like, nobody's going to bother to read his reports and his doctors. But, if the White House is sending people door to door and, they're saying that we had to take these 12 accounts off of Facebook, a lot of people who don't trust the Democratic Party and Joe Biden as president are going to become more skeptical and not less by these tactics. And so it's very interesting of what the goals are, because it seems pretty clear that would be the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what even constitutes misinformation, I think, is kind of a fine line. Like, I certainly have seen plenty of stuff on social media that is clearly vaccine disinformation. Some of the stuff about microchips or something, like, I don't know, it's BS. You try to look up, they give you some patent number to look up or something, and you look it up and it's just like, there's nothing really to this. Like, there is legit vaccine misinformation out there. However, when you start talking about things like, I don't know, the lab leak theory or something, things that start off as kind of a fringe idea and slowly get more and more mainstream acceptance from, media outlets and the scientific community. So it's kind of hard to say, like, you can't always tell what's misinformation right away. Something that starts off as kind of like a seemingly fringe claim might actually turn out to have, more backing than you thought. And I think you just kind of have to let people work these things out and discuss them and debate them, especially when you see things like, a scientist on Twitter having a debate with another scientist, for Twitter to then to deign upon itself to mediate that debate as if they're an authority in it. I just find that absurd. Like, you need to let these debates happen, I think.
Right. And one more thing I'll point out, Will, is that still anytime I share a news roundup, you get this second, you basically have to click continue that you still want to share the post if it mentions COVID-19. Not if if I were to say COVID-19 exists in my news roundup, it would still generate this flag. I mean, I haven't tried to go that far, but I have just CNN headlines I essentially retype in my news roundup, and it will still give me that flag. And so that kind of stuff is really disturbing to me. Well, also I'll notice that anytime anybody posts something like I got the vaccine and I felt sick after I got my cousin got the vaccine and died the next week, like
Right.
they have to put like the COVID vaccines are safe for everyone flag on there. It's just like, why can't people have the conversation and talk about what their experiences are? And look, if there's only like very few posts of people saying they got sick from the vaccine, then people are going to see that and realize they don't need. But if every time somebody shares something, it gets a flag, again, you think that something is being hidden from you and you wonder why. And I'm sure in some cases it is, and that there is suppression of that kind of content.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, what else do we have to get into here? The Breonna Taylor. Oh, one more thing I want to mention about propaganda when it comes to COVID, and that
Yeah.
is everything that is a consequence of the lockdowns is being blamed on the pandemic. And I
That's
think
right.
this is
Yeah.
a really dishonest and really disgusting trick. I noticed it recently in this CNN article titled Drug Overdose Deaths in 2020 hit highest number ever recorded, CDC data shows. And it goes in there that this is during the pandemic, not the lockdowns. That that's what put people out of work, that's what took people away from their friends. People were anxious. People didn't see their families, their parents, for a year or more, because they were afraid that they would kill them if they went and hugged their grandma or something like that. And so like, I mean, the old rat park experiments like are pretty clear that if you deprive people of any other stimuli, they're going to be more likely to see drugs. And it seemed like the government just created the perfect storm, and now we had overdose deaths up 30% in 2020. It seems like this is a consequence of the lockdowns and something that the pro lockdowners have to reckon with. There was more deaths of other kinds, maybe not because of COVID, but look, the people overdosing aren't in nursing homes, right? These are younger people that are ending up killing themselves in this way, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely tragic. And again, even if you still want to be pro lockdown and think that utilitarianism, like overall the lockdown saved more lives, that's fine, but you have to at least be honest and acknowledge that the lockdowns did have negative consequences, and that increased use in very dangerous drugs like heroin, and with that fentanyl is a part of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you see that a lot, just like the sort of conflation of the pandemic itself with the containment policies imposed to stop the pandemic, which, we can debate about how effective those were. But yeah, whether or not you support those, I think you still have to kind of make the distinction clear that, they're not the same.
Will, one thing I want to follow up on before we wrap up, a case that we have talked about a lot in detail as it is unfolded, is the Breonna Taylor killing. This, I believe, 26-year-old woman who was in her bed with, her boyfriend when the cops came in the middle of the night, kicked down the door. A shootout ensues, and she ends up taking a bunch of bullets from cops when she wasn't even armed. And they say no body cam footage, but maybe there's body cam footage. What's going on here, Will?
Yeah, yeah. So earlier this month, Breonna Taylor's family has filed this new lawsuit that seems like it could be a really big deal. And really, right now, there's not a whole lot out about it. So there's not a ton to cover here, ton of details. But it seems like it could be huge because pretty much all throughout this case, the cops have insisted that they have no body camera footage from the raid itself, from the police raid on her apartment. They claim that they only have footage from afterward when Taylor was already dead and sort of the cops were there like cleaning up the mess. And in some of that footage, even, it's kind of interesting. You can see one of the cops who was part of the raid trying to enter the crime scene, and another cop who showed up afterward is like, "Dude, you can't be here. Like, you're like involved in this. You can't be on the crime scene." So we got some interesting footage from previously, but this new lawsuit claims now that there may be actually body cam footage from the raid itself, like during while Breonna Taylor was shot, because they're claiming that the police department had recently upgraded their body cameras to where they would automatically turn on whenever like a squad car or even an undercover police vehicle, whenever it activates their lights. I think it like sends out this signal that's supposed to automatically activate the body cams. And so this new lawsuit is claiming that that may have happened on the night of the raid when Taylor was killed. So they are now like basically requesting this footage and at the same time asking the cops to effectively acknowledge that it even exists. Because that's what I said. There's not that much to it. It's not even totally clear that this footage does exist. But this lawsuit just says they have good reason to believe that maybe there is more footage. And at one point, they even said that the police department has spread misinformation to the public about this case. So that is sort of their general allegation. Um, I haven't seen a whole lot of reporting on this. Like it got picked up in a few outlets, but there's not like much coverage. This could be a really big deal for the whole Breonna Taylor case, though, because it would change like a fundamental fact that the cops have maintained all along. It would just basically show they lied.
Yeah. This is one of the real problems I've had with body cameras all along. Not that I'm not somewhat in favor of them, but
Yeah.
we have to be honest in that there's some real problems with them. First of all, if you're putting a body camera on every cop, you're putting a camera on every cop, and that potentially means a license plate reader, a facial recognition reader. That as these things improve, as the AI improves, we could be looking at some pretty nefarious surveillance equipment by giving cops
Yeah.
all these cameras and inspecting. At the same time, maybe maybe it's worth it as an off trade for most of the time a cop kills somebody. We have a body camera footage, so we know when it was like an execution or a murder. The other issue with body camera footage that we have, and this is, I think, is a solvable problem. In almost every case, the police department actually controls the footage, and
Right.
so if the police department controls the footage, and it makes the cops look bad, this doesn't mean in every case they're gonna delete it, hide it. But we've seen a lot of cases where they release footage selectively, so they won't show the part where in one case I covered recently, a kid threw his gun away, and they cut out that part of the body cam footage when they initially released it to the public, which was really important. So, Will, anything else on this before we wrap up?
No, I mean absolutely. I think that could be one thing they could do. Maybe they could like ideally actually it would be great if the body cam footage just like automatically uploaded to the cloud to a publicly accessible account on YouTube or something. Like that'd be one idea. But of course, that's unlikely they'd be that transparent. But maybe the DA or something, the local the prosecutor's office there could be some separation between who controls this footage. Because yeah, we see if indeed the Louisville Police Department does have this body cam footage, we can see the real pitfall of the police having control of that because they have every incentive to bury it if it shows their officers doing something wrong.
Right. Well, maybe we could look at like a civilian oversight board, because you probably do want some layer. Uh, Cops do get called to do welfare checks, and so if you're in your home, some cop
Yes, yeah,
comes and knocks on your door, and like people have hard times, like people have mental health crises, so you're sitting there in your underwear, like doing something like really crazy, like you don't want like everybody to be able to see that,
yeah,
and so maybe like some kind of civilian oversight board having control of it, or you point out the prosecutor or DA's office, maybe preferably one that's not directly connected to the police department,
right.
so from a different district or something like that, different state. But I would prefer in the hands of somebody who's not involved in the criminal justice system, I guess, necessarily.
Yeah,
Anyways,
exactly.
Will, should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, that's all I had. I would definitely urge people to pay attention to that case. That could be, huge for the whole Breonna Taylor case.
Yeah, and hopefully it would be maybe a groundbreaking moment for the way we treat this body cam footage. Anyways, Will, great show. Tell people where they could find you.
Yeah, sure. I'm a staff writer at RT, and I collect all my writings on my Twitter handle, and you can find me at the Will Porter.
All right.
That's basically a one-stop shop.
I'm at Kyle Anslone _. The show's at con _interest. Donate to the show, Patreon, subscribe star. The show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, YouTube and Odysee for video versions. And thanks everybody for listening, supporting, and sharing the show. Me and Will, I know we really love bringing you the news and talking about this kind of stuff and being able to do this. And it's because people keep listening and blowing up the show that makes it worth it to do it. So, Will, thanks, and we'll be back with more shows this week.
Thanks, everybody. See you.